D'abord, je tiens à remercier les organisateurs de cette rencontre parce que ça nous permet, nous, comme la RDC, en marge de ce sommet, combien important pour le pays, à pouvoir ensemble, vous savez, la RDC, c'est l'un des pays très importants dans les questions liées aux enjeux sur le climat.
So I would just like to say thank you on behalf of the Congo, on the Democratic Republic of Congo. It is a very important topic close to our heart to talk about markets and in particular the carbon trade.
Et moi, comme le ministre d'État en charge de l'aménagement du territoire,
And myself in charge of the Ministry of Spatial Planning.
me convier à ce genre d'échange, c'est très important parce que ça permet à notre pays, en tout cas en ce qui concerne notre secteur, de participer activement à ces grands débats, à ces discussions autour des enjeux sur le climat.
And for myself, Minister LOANDO, to be invited on panels like at COP29 at the Pavilion, to be able to talk about these aspects and what we are doing in the DRC is vital for the development of our economy. So thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. Jacob.
Thank you, Anthony. Jacob Clayton, and I'm the CEO of Sagent. We're very close with the Globe legislators, and this year we're very proud to be the sponsors of the Parliamentary Pavilion. And Sagent does one thing, and it's really focused on building the market infrastructure, so the exchange, the custody platforms, and ingesting the data. And I think Anthony's quite familiar with taking that environmental data, converting it to a token. And we're focused on building the market infrastructure so we can scale the climate finance. Part of that is providing the market infrastructure that's integrated on top of a compliance program of record. And our focus is working with global legislators, working with esteemed colleagues such as Minister in advising on how to establish compliance systems of record and build that architecture on top of that.
Thank you. Grace?
Thank you so much. And my name is Grace Smith, and I'm in charge of the environmental operations at Sagent, which looks at how we complete the compliance system of records with eco-assets and the whole clients on the ground. Once we have this system of record built for a country, how do the land owners benefit from this? And we can unpack that a little bit more today.
Thank you. And I believe we're still waiting for at least one or two panelists. I'll ask them to introduce themselves when they arrive. But let's dive straight in. And actually, I want to deal with the trickiest, thorniest, the elephant in the room that we are seeing already with carbon markets. There's a lot of distrust out there about putting a price on carbon or on other assets. There's a big conversation going on around biodiversity credits and not allowing those to be traded on a secondary market. How do we build confidence? How do we build a system that brings civil society, ordinary people with us, and that they feel they benefit from, that provides them with the protections, the life, the security they want, and is not felt to be, I think, by the broader climate and nature movement, an alternative to real action? Maybe, Minister, you touched on this in terms of, designing something that benefits your people. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you're tackling this in the Congo.
Et comme vous le savez si bien, la RDC fait partie des pays africains qui hébergent le bassin du Congo.
So as you know, the DRC is one of the countries within the Congo Basin.
Il y a un concept très public, très médiatisé chez nous, qui est prôné par son Excellence, Monsieur le Chef de l'État. On parle du Congo pays solution.
So there's a very big topic that's often talked about, which is that the Congo is a country of solutions that the president often refers to.
Malheureusement, ce qui se passe aujourd'hui, c'est que le crédit carbone, il est négocié en Occident à près de 200 euros par tonne.
Unfortunately, one of the big issues for a country like ours is that the price of carbon is negotiated too often in Europe, sometimes at 200 euros a ton.
Mais en Afrique, on est encore autour de 2-3 $ la tonne.
But in Africa, we tend to often see $2 or $3 a ton when it gets negotiated on the land.
Et donc, les pays qui sont censés bénéficier de ces finances vertes n'en bénéficient pas comme il se doit.
And so a lot of countries, especially in African countries that are supposed to benefit the most from these credit sales, often benefit of the sales the least.
Aujourd'hui, il y a eu des échanges à haut niveau entre le chef d'État de l'Afrique avec le président de la Banque africaine de développement sur cette question de ce qu'on appelle le PIB vert pour les pays africains.
Today, there were some negotiations with the 15 countries in Africa, especially from the head of the African Union, talking about with the African Development Bank the price of carbon and what we can do about it.
Nous parlons de quoi? Nous parlons de près de 39 milliards de tonnes de de carbone que l'Afrique absorbe par rapport aux activités industrielles. Mais comparativement à cela, ce qui était censé revenir aux pays africains en termes de finances vertes est totalement insuffisant pour couvrir et accompagner le développement des initiatives de développement des pays africains.
And the topic was how to boost the GDP in the African continent. And what was discussed was that although there seems to be a lot of green finance externally, to bring the finance onto the ground to assist the project developers to get access to then create the issuance of carbon credits is very tricky.
Dans le cadre de notre pays, notre chef de l'État avait signé une lettre d'entente avec l'initiative de protection des forêts de l'Afrique centrale. C'était à Oslo. Voilà.
So just one example that the president of the DRC had signed an MOU with Oslo about the selling of carbon credits, forest carbon credits.
C'était sur 1 milliard, mais avec deux tranches de 500 millions et 500 millions pour soutenir un certain nombre de projets de développement en RDC, mais ces fonds n'ont jamais été débloqués.
And it was an MOU to discuss the agreement of $1 billion to be deployed in the DRC, 2 tranches, 500 million and then another 500 million. It has still stalled. It was never deployed. It's still blocked.
Donc pour nous, comme la RDC, les finances vertes restent encore une utopie. Ce n'est pas vraiment une vraie réalité que nous ressentons dans la vie quotidienne de nos populations. Et ça, c'est un cheval de bataille de notre chef de l'État, Félix-Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo.
And this is one of the issues, is that too often we have a lot of promises, but to actually receive the funding and be able to deploy it on the ground is a huge battle that we continue to see. And that is one of the hurdles to be able to actually tap into the carbon market that then brings funding to assist projects on the ground to tackle deforestation and other programs, as the President, Head of State has mentioned.
So maybe if we could just maybe go and talk a little bit about then the technology, because I think this is really helpful. And what it screams to me is the need for transparency. Now, carbon market 1.0, which is a lot of my experience, was all about commoditization, following the inevitable logic of neoliberalism, commoditize efficiency. But here, is that really consistent with what we're trying to achieve? And technology now, the sort of technology that you're working with, almost creates the potential for transparency at all ends of the carbon and the supply chain for eco assets, from those right at the bottom who are working in the land on those projects, the public authorities, right the way up to the final end users and buyers. They can actually know potentially where their credit comes from, how much is being paid for it, what the costs were of development, all of that potentially could be available to everyone. Do you think there's potential for that in the technology? Do you think we've moved away from this idea of pure commoditization to really understanding the specifics that underlie these commodities?
Yeah, I do. And in fact, we have some models that have proven to be very successful, in the past. And if you look at any commodity exchange, they have your market insights features. They're tracking the future sale of a commodity. So whether that's wheat or that's aluminum or tin. What's interesting is those market features have existed for a long time. What has changed though in the technology are the digital assets or the digital asset exchanges. And what governs a digital asset is a data contract, and it can represent any real world asset, whether it's an environmental benefit or a real world asset like a commodity. And I think this is interesting because this is where policy and technology are colliding, and it's a unique opportunity in the market. What we know right now is the European Union is launching CBAM, or the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. And what that serves is uh, as really a catalyst for other nations to do very similar schemes. So really quick, CBAM essentially imposes a tariff. So any exports into the EU, ton of aluminum, for instance, you're going to see by 2030 about a 55% tariff on aluminum. Now it changes for cement because it's tied to actually the CO2e output per ton of commodity. So what that does is cause a decision point for a nation that's importing or exporting to the EU. They can either pay that price, and that's a fair price on the EU, trading system, or they can implement their own cap and trade programs. If countries across Africa do implement a cap and trade program, what that does is instead of paying that to the EU, that tariff, you actually pay that to yourself. Keep that within the country. So recycle that same environmental benefit capital to projects in your own country to fund your own cap and trade programs. So we know CBAM is coming. It's starting in 2027 all the way through 2030. And that gives you some time to implement a cap and trade program where all these market mechanisms, that trust, what you're talking about, Anthony, is delivered through the technology platform. So digital assets enable you to have traceable, immutable, and auditable digital assets that are traded. So as you are delivering your agriculture or any of your commodity, your tin, iron, that you're able to trade those and attach the environmental benefits so it's nature neutral, and use the same mechanisms that you see for all these commodity markets while funding all your environmental benefit programs.
Thank you. And as we move into transition, it's we're in a transition. We can't treat the world in the way it was. We don't know all the solutions, and so we need diversity of thinking, diversity of perspectives, whether that's people from different countries, different genders, people whose brains are wired differently. So Grace, I want not suggesting your brain is wired differently, although mine certainly is. I definitely fall into the neurodiverse camp, but I also feel slightly uncomfortable with us just having a conversation amongst men, quite frankly. So I think it's really important to bring that perspective in here. So how do we think about this in a fresh way? We're in, we're talking about creating a commodity out of the natural assets, the natural wealth that we have, to protect us, but potentially using thinking and a system that's got us into this mess in the first place. So, have you got any thoughts about how we bring fresh thinking to this and use the technology that is part of your platform to be able to do that?
Yes, thank you. I think one of the solutions that I've come across recently that we are representing as well is the BMV standard, which is a tradable asset now, but it started 10, 15 years ago, two women in Brazil talking about how biodiversity could actually become a commodity that could be traded on the B3. The idea is to think beyond just your usual ecosystems that tick along, nutrients in the ground, birds that are singing. What about what happens when you don't hear them anymore? What happens to communities on the ground that are supposed to be the landowners and the custodians, but they don't have finance? How can we bring that finance to them? How can we create microfinance, microbanks, public hearings so that community leadership can have a voice to protect the forest, to then elect not just male representatives, but everyone? And actually, we're seeing that already on the ground in the DRC. Recently, I visited Equatoria Era in Batankusu, which is the film that was playing before, which is an incredible program ran by men and women. They have public hearings, microfinance funding, and that mechanism is going to be supported by the government program that will encompass eco assets, and it will become carbon credits, biodiversity credits, and it won't just be trees represent money. It's so much more than that.
Thank you so much. Your Excellency, your country and countries like yours, the natural resources that are in your country, let's face it, they provide a huge service to the rest of the planet. Countries who've done away with their equivalent natural resources now, quite frankly, depend on countries like yours to maintain those for our collective survival. So how do we ensure that we build a system that ensures that we don't get the services, the hugely valuable services your country provides us, without paying a fair price to you and your people for doing that?
Il faut dire que j'ai dans mes attributions l'évaluation des ressources naturelles du sol et du sous-sol de mon pays. C'est parmi les choses qui sont dans mes attributions.
So one of my main mandates of Minister of Spatial Planning is to assess the feasibility of the natural wealth of all ecosystems above and below ground.
Et dès que cette évaluation est faite, il faut les valoriser, ces ressources-là. C'est comme cela qu'il y a cette grande réflexion pour voir comment, comme il a si bien dit, ce pays qui est au cœur de beaucoup d'enjeux mondiaux sur le climat, ce pays à la taille d'un continent, comment effectivement la RDC peut capter toutes ces finances vertes pour financer son économie. Et vous avez été au Congo profond, vous avez été à Basankusu, vous avez vu le besoin de ces populations locales. Ils ont vraiment besoin que des projets qu'ils ont, des projets sur le plan communautaire, puissent avoir des financements conséquents.
So another thing to state is our country is the size of a continent. It's hugely decentralized. One of the key points was to go in under his mandate and understand the value, the natural capital, natural wealth, and then understand the physical value of it, monetarily, the financial value, and then bring it to the international market, and then try and go back into how can we harness that green finance and bring it back to the communities on the ground. I myself, with my team at Sagent, went into the deep equatorial province and saw the huge impact socioeconomically that this could have to change their lives.
Et alors, pour prendre part activement à ce marché mondial, mon ministère, conformément au programme du gouvernement, nous avons finalisé 2 livrables très importants, à savoir les titres sur le capital forestier et les titres sur le potentiel agricole. C'est 2 livrables extrêmement importants dans ces enjeux sur le climat.
And 2 very important chapters that we have just led under the Ministry of Spatial Planning to tackle the international market are the forestry value, the value of forests, and the value of arable land, agriculture.
Et il y a un autre instrument extrêmement important qu'il n'y avait pas, c'était le cadre légal. Le Congo, notre pays, n'avait pas une législation appropriée sur l'aménagement du territoire. Et c'est grâce au gouvernement actuel que maintenant, il y a un nouveau cadre légal qui va voir le jour, qui intègre les enjeux sur le climat.
And there was not, up till now, under the Ministry of Spatial Planning, any legal financial instrument under this ministry that could capture that and understand the value and then monetize it. Now there is a new law that is being passed and being released that will allow the Ministry of Spatial Planning to understand the value of the land and bring it internationally.
Et donc, tous ces outils vont permettre à la RDC de jouir pleinement de ces richesses, de jouir pleinement de toutes ces opportunités que les enjeux mondiaux sur le climat lui offrent, notamment en matière de finances vertes. Donc, il y a une prise de conscience sur le plan politique général, et ça, c'est depuis l'avènement du chef de l'État Félix-Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo à la tête de notre pays.
And this is because under the current presidency of President Felix, there now has these new financial instruments and this new market mechanism in the DRC, which will allow for the natural wealth to be understood and made the most of in the country as well, and redistributed to the population.
Et maintenant, on est en train de s'engager comme sur le plan local. Tous les outils tous les instruments sont disponibles. C'est d'aller maintenant vers les autres acteurs, d'autres spécialistes, d'autres solutions innovantes en matière de technologie, dans des plateformes que nous allons installer dans le pays pour faire bénéficier vraiment, alors vraiment, le pays de toutes ces finances vertes qu'il faut ramener pour financer l'économie nationale, parce qu'il y a vraiment ce besoin de financer l'économie nationale par les finances vertes.
And now that landscape is ready, our key role now is to go and find the right partners, in particular the right tech platforms, fintechs that can come and create a compliant system of record so that these eco assets can actually be traceable, and that we can bring that funding back to the local community landowners and make the socioeconomic uplift.
And also, if I can mention something, right now, I can say that we have a small market in carbon. It's not more developed, it's only neutral. So what we need to put in place in the next few days, according to the government program, to have a big market, so that's why we need to use the technology, the new one, to use the people. We have all the infrastructure we need to push, because we know that people are trading with the carbon credit for DRC, but they never been there, they never investing really in some projects in the country. That's why we are in charge of the regional planning, and we're gonna push. We finish all the things we have to put in place locally. Now we're gonna push internationally to help the country, because we need to finance our budget by the carbon credit fund. Yes.
Wonderful. Well, actually, I mean, picking up on that, and let's go back to the title. We touched a little bit on this, Jacob, when you talked about CBAM. At this point, I think about linking markets within countries, internationally, the Article 6 conversation that's going on here that seems to go on every year.
Yeah.
And every year we hope we're going to get resolution, which, for those watching, means essentially a system for how we recognize joint action through a sort of representation of that in carbon credits. And the fact that, if we just take carbon, but this is broader in terms of eco assets, but one of the increasingly some of the increasingly scarce resources on this planet is the capacity of our atmosphere to absorb greenhouse gases. So how do we build a system at scale then, so bigger markets, which also doesn't lose, I think, those local benefits and benefits for people? The technology, your ability to build technology that links those markets is going to be a key part of that. So how do we do that in a way where we don't lose those local benefits and advantages that we've been discussing in this panel?
Anthony, I think that's a key question in developing the right strategy and how you would unroll such a large program. Now, we have programs like the Nasdaq, or it's a securities exchange. It's $26 trillion. It grew over time, and now it's based on some industry standard technologies, but it's for the United States, right? For companies listed in the United States. So what we need really is a new architecture for an exchange, and I think it needs to be driven by the strategy. The DRC is the most resource-rich country in the world. I mean, you're talking over $26 trillion worth of assets that can be mined, and you're also, if you connect the green belt, as we would call it, Brazil, DRC, Indonesia, that is where most of the world's biodiversity is at. So I think, if we're looking at a market for the global south, it would be an exchange that works across Brazil, DRC, Indonesia, that you can see the capital from the global north. There's plenty of capital, but it's about unlocking that capital in a scalable way for programs to protect and keep these rainforests vital. I think the way to do that might be an integrated cap and trade program. And Minister, I know there's been many discussions about the trilateral accords between Brazil, DRC, Indonesia, which I believe would be a catalyst if that became the supply for the world, and it was all on the same system, then I think you're talking about unlocking the trillions of dollars of capital that does want to get and protect these rainforests.
And Grace, pick it up maybe on some of the points you were talking about earlier. That envisages actually differences, which is natural. Different countries, different cultures, different communities may want systems that they feel more comfortable with. And so you have differences in the underlying basis of those systems. Can technology still achieve that sort of link and the sort of scale, but whilst allowing those local differences? There's almost sort of, well, what's that phrase? There is a phrase, isn't there? You know, common but differentiated. Exactly. But also systems, I think.
I think that's a really good question. I think we have to actually totally separate ourselves from the fact that there are differences. Every country, every community is different, but we have to celebrate them. When we were looking at forestry conservation locally, what I've been brought up to see as forestry conservation in the UK is entirely different to what's happening on the ground in Basankusu, for example. In Basankusu, what they would be able to do as forestry protection and then create additionality is trading larvae from caterpillars. It's a whole other system, and they trade those goods against other goods. It's not even monetary. It's not even a monetary value for them. But having access to funding is crucial to get the agronomists on the ground to come and do the training. I think it's a blended model, having international Web3 tech blockchain tokenized structures coming in at a certain level, perhaps in the larger cities, which will be able to connect countries from the global south to the international markets, all while doing job creation and scaling up and training a whole new way of thinking for certain communities on the ground, but also integrating communities on the ground with how they think and how they work as well. So it's you need both.
And that's really helpful, because the phrase, one of the phrases I think I was grasping for, sort of popped into my mind then as you were talking. You know, and I think it's very relevant to this pavilion we're in, you know, and globe, where all politics ultimately is local. And let me tell you from my own war wounds in terms of trying to build carbon markets around the world, the politics of getting carbon markets up and on their feet is a damn sight harder than I would have ever thought. But perhaps if we can find a way within which local communities can be part of building those in a way they feel comfortable with, that's going to be a lot easier for politicians, parliamentarians to take those and pass them, but in a way where we still achieve the sort of scale by joining them up. So maybe, Your Excellency, if you could say a little bit then about, you know, I think the politics of this that you're facing and that you have to sort of navigate as you build this system. So the sort of political challenges that are going to be there for you, but and the sort of solutions that you see to sort of take this forward.
You know, the government of DRC, according to the vision of the president, so we are building, you know, because we know that to be eligible to the credit carbon, there are some efforts has been done, like a government, especially to fight the corruption, the democracy, to put in place the rules, you know, make people comfortable. All the people investing in the green finance, they have to make sure that if they put $1, the $1 is gonna go to the population. As Grace said, that she was and at Basankusu. So if there is something to build an hospital, let the money go to the ground and to build that hospital. So we need that effort, and the government, according to the vision of our president, Felix Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo, we are doing a lot of effort politically, to put in place the rules, to make transparency, because, you know, the most important thing is just not to raise money. No, the money has to go to the ground to help really the local population, because this is the one we are asking them to do a lot of effort, you know. So in DRC government, since the President Felix Antoine Tshisekedi is in charge of the country, I can tell you that there is a lot of things he's done, especially to put in place the rules. And I think that the future will be more better. And we know that if we want to have access to all the green finance, there are a political effort has to be done from the government, from all the political institutions in the country, and we are working together because it's not just the game for one person, for one institution, not only for the government. We need also the effort from the parliament because we need some laws regarding of that. We need the control as well. That's why we have. I'm talking about how to fight the corruption. There is in place. There is an institution called EGF. Is doing a good job about to fight the corruption, to make sure that uh, 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 um, the market of credit, the population local, because they need it. They need to have schools. They need to have roads. It's not like now because where the area we call Equateur is there. We are talking about for the challenge about the climate rules. Basankus is there, but if you compare the situation of the population, we are here at Bakou talking about climate change, but the real population where the forests, if you compare the situation and what we are talking about, $1 trillion, it's no way. So there is a big effort here has to be done for us, like the people who is in charge of the management of the country, from the president and all the institutions. I can tell you, we are doing that effort, and you can check. You can also see. But what we need now, we just don't need to talk. Now, Africa, there is a press release coming out, according to what the head of state they decided this morning. But as a DRC, because we are here, a delegation. The delegation is conducted by our Premier Minister, Marchandises Tuluka. What we need, just not talk. Now we need to see. We need to see the project financing by the market from the credit carbon. Yeah.
Yes, Malini.
Thank you so much. This has been fascinating. I have a question for you because, of course, we are very delighted with this partnership with Sage International, and we're delighted to have you, Minister, in particular, on the stage because Globe has been working on the issue of legislation to promote Red Plus in countries such as DRC, also in Nigeria, in Senegal. So we carried out this piece of research with legislators in the DRC to address specifically the issues that you're talking about, which is to ensure that along with the institutional readiness, there is legislative readiness. And my question to you really is firstly, and then I would also like to call on a senior member of the parliament formerly in Nigeria, who is our vice president for Africa, Honorable Sam Onuigbo, who is here with us, for his perspectives from a Nigerian perspective on what you're hearing. But my question is this. So we are here now in COP29. COP26, just a few years ago, there was a very large pavilion. I went there, the DRC pavilion. And there was a similar ambition which was expressed about come and help us. Come and help us so that we can create a positive, trustworthy exchange system on these issues. So the question is this: what advances have been made since that conversation? And what are the challenges that remain still? Because it's actually not the finance COP, but as we saw from the very first day, the rule setting COP. We now have the rules agenda for Article 6.4, which has been agreed. So that was my question to you. And I would also urge our Vice President to bring a parliamentary perspective.
Oui, merci pour la question.
Thank you so much for the question.
On comprend très bien que il y a cette ambition qui a été exprimée depuis y compris en COP 26.
We fully understand that since COP26, we did express this ambition.
Et les États africains, principalement la RDC, revient encore avec les mêmes préoccupations sur le financement. Comment capter le financement dans le cadre des efforts sur la biodiversité, sur le climat.
And time and again, African nations are coming back once again with the same speech, saying we need finance, we need assistance to protect our biodiversity and our ecology ecosystems.
Mais on est très conscient que pour capter ces finances vertes, il y a des efforts internes qui doivent être faits pour être éligible à ce type de financement.
But we're very conscious that in order to capture this green finance, a lot of work internally needs to be done to create the legislation and to receive that.
Et il y a des infrastructures qu'il faut mettre en place pour accéder à ce type de financement.
And there are legislative bodies and infrastructures at parliamentary level that need to be created for such.
Que ce soit sur le plan légal, que ce soit sur le plan institutionnel, que ce soit sur le plan technologique.
Be it legal, institutional, technical, that all needs, the groundwork needs to be done.
C'est pour cela que la RDC, dans le cadre de l'aménagement du territoire, nous s'est lancé dans un vaste programme de réformes sur le plan intérieur.
And that is why under the Ministry of Spatial Planning, we have really pushed forth for a huge shift, a huge series of reforms to restructure it.
Et ces réformes ont permis, comme j'ai dit, à produire un certain nombre d'outils qu'ils n'avaient pas avant, dont la politique nationale sur l'aménagement du territoire qui existe, qui est un outil d'orientation par rapport à la gestion de l'aménagement du territoire dans notre pays.
So we've created a few tools. The first tool is the new set of tools under the Ministry of Spatial Planning that were never there before on understanding the feasibility studies and then the value of natural resources above and below and in the forest and arable agricultural lands.
Un deuxième instrument très important, c'est la loi sur l'aménagement du territoire, qui n'existait pas avant, à part le décret de 1957. Et là, il y a un cadre légal qui se met en place, qui n'existait pas,
And
qui existe même.
And other than a legal framework that was put in place under a decree in 1957,
Mhm.
there is now a new whole Ministry of Spatial Planning legislative body and legislative structure that has been put in place.
Et tous ces outils dont je viens de citer ont été mis en place dans un processus participatif. La population a été complètement impliquée dans la production de ces outils-là.
And the creation of these new tools under the Ministry of Spatial Planning was 100% involving local community, local population, getting their voice, getting them part of structuring the new legislative framework.
Parce que la durabilité suppose la participation des personnes concernées dans la population locale.
Because the word sustainability for even a sustainable framework implies community engagement.
Et nous avons une composante qu'on appelle la société civile qui a vraiment pris part activement dans l'élaboration de tous ces outils-là. La société civile.
And so we have used civil society to really encompass public hearing and voices from the local community to create these new market mechanisms and structures.
Et comme j'ai dit également, il y avait des études préalables qu'on n'en avait pas avant. C'était l'étude sur le capital forestier et l'étude sur le potentiel agricole qui ont été initiées par le ministère de l'Aménagement du Territoire et qui sont aujourd'hui, qui ont été délivrées aujourd'hui.
And until now, there has never been a nationwide, at all of the different state levels and provincial levels in the DRC, any feasibility studies done on the arable agricultural land, nor even the natural wealth from forests. But this has now been conducted.
Maintenant, il y a une donne très importante, c'est que la RDC, comme vous le savez, est accusée non seulement avec la situation de la guerre de l'Est, où il n'y a pas une traçabilité sur la provenance de tout ce qu'il y a comme ressources dans le pays. Ça, le gouvernement est en train de mettre en place un mécanisme pour rendre traçable la provenance de toutes les ressources dans notre pays.
Now, one huge challenge that the DRC has always had and still has today is the conflict area in the east and how to be able to monetize from natural raw materials that come from those areas without much information. And so the DRC Ministry of Spatial Planning and other ministries are putting in place traceable, transparent series of compliance mechanisms to be able to understand what is coming out from these areas.
Il faut que tous les minerais qui sont aujourd'hui utilisés dans la fabrication des batteries électriques, dans la fabrication des voitures électriques, que les personnes qui jouissent de matières premières puissent être en mesure de dire, de donner la provenance réelle de ces éco-actifs.
We need to have a world where anyone using raw material, refined and end products that have come from raw materials and mining minerals from the DRC should be able to say internationally that elements in my telephone or in my TV have come from this area. We know it's been traceable and traceable, and it's transparent, and we know which hands have come, and touched this product.
Ce n'est pas responsable d'utiliser des minerais qui proviennent des activités des enfants, des femmes enceintes, des femmes qui sont violées, comme ça se fait à l'est de notre pays, et qu'il y a des industries qui utilisent ce type de minerais. C'est irresponsable sur le plan de la durabilité, sur le plan de ce monde que nous voulons qu'il y ait la paix.
In terms of a sustainable vision and in terms of a responsible world looking at using raw materials globally, it is irresponsible to still have children, pregnant women, women who are pregnant from rape, to be involved in the whole supply chain of raw materials. This should not be happening anymore. We do not want it to happen anymore.
That's why all the time our president is talking about the peace in the east part of our country, because when Congo, we have peace in our country, that's going to help the world as well, because as you know, cobalt is coming from DRC, copper is coming DRC, we have now lithium with discovery there is a huge project there. So if we still have fire in the country, how you can say exactly where all the mineral is coming from? That can't help the world. That's why our president, Félix Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo, is fighting every day. Say, OK, le monde a besoin du Congo. Le Congo veut jouer à la transparence, mais il faut que nous ayons la paix, parce que dans les conflits, dans la guerre, c'est impossible de retracer la provenance de tous ces minéraux. Comment ça a été obtenu?
And so the Congo, the president is saying the world needs the Congo, but how can it work with raw materials from the Congo if it is not traceable, if you cannot know whether raw materials come from conflict zones or not? This cannot happen anymore.
Qui peut accepter d'utiliser les téléphones cellulaires qui sont fabriqués avec des minéraux parce qu'un enfant a été dans un trou pour extraire ces minéraux-là?
Today, who would accept to use a telephone that we all have, but that we don't really know whether hands of small children have been going into these mines or not? This should not be happening today.
Qui peut regarder une télévision qui est fabriquée par des minéraux extraits du sous-sol par une femme? On l'a exigé d'aller faire cette activité, et à la fin de l'activité, on la viole, et c'est ces minéraux-là qu'on fabrique les télévisions que nous utilisons. Qui peut accepter ça?
Who could accept today?
Then I have to.
Who could accept today that anyone would use a TV or watch a TV at home that has been made of raw materials from a woman who was forced to go down below ground, extract this, and then when she came out, she was then raped, not paid, and yet this is still sold internationally?
That's why, that's why DRC now, we engage in a new process for more transparency, for more, we have to open and to put in place the new infrastructure. That's why we need Sage Intel to help us together in the PPP, partnership between private and public, to put in place all the process going to help us to have access to the financing in the world.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rex.